But we're extremely lucky in the Passive House community in the sense that the knowledge sharing and the welcoming of anybody joining our community, the inclusivity, I think is pretty different and pretty impressive compared to other portions of the construction industry, I would say.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland, New Zealand. And I'm joined this week by Zach. Zach, how you going?
I'm doing well, thank you.
And special guest this week, we've got Jay. Jay, how are you doing?
I am doing fantastic. Great to be here.
And whereabouts are you, Jay?
I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, which is just about an hour east of the Smoky Mountains.
Nice. And how's things there? Is it getting cold in your part of the world?
It's a little chilly. Some of the higher elevations nearby had some snow. I guess it was last night. So far, we're clear of that. But it is starting to dip quite a bit at night.
And you're new to the podcast, so welcome to the podcast. But you'll be a familiar face, I think, to a lot of people from the Passive House Accelerator, because you've done a lot of stuff over there. So, but it's great to have you on the pod.
Yeah, it's great to finally be here. You know, I've been writing different articles for the Accelerator for about over 3 years now. So it's been quite a journey.
All right. Well, we've got a first part of a great extended interview this week. So we're going to crack into that and talk about some really cool stuff, just industry-wide, but also a couple of specific projects to get stuck into. But before we do that, Zach, let's thank our sponsors.
Yeah, absolutely. Our big thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture. So you'll notice a change in name there. It's really cool. Ingui Architecture, formerly known as Baxt Ingui Architects, Glavel, Minutair, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Also, thank you to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, Proseco, and Source 2050. And a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority.
All right. Thank you to them, and thank you to all our listeners as always. And don't forget to check out all of our awesome content, a lot of it written by Jay, as he's mentioned. But in particular, I want to bring people's attention to a couple of projects, in one in particular, the University of Toronto Scarborough Student Resident Hall, which now has a new name, which our guest will explain a little bit about in this interview. And that is Marine Sanchez. And we've featured Marine on the podcast before, but also she's been on previous lives, or this one was a happy hour. So back in the day, Global Passive House Happy Hour. So there's some really great content showing some of the projects that Marine has been involved in. But I think we should just jump into it straight away, shouldn't we? Because you do a really good intro. This is your conversation, Jay. Is there anything you want to talk about before we get into it?
I guess, and this isn't clear in the podcast because I have a really good poker face, but I was trying hard not to fanboy out talking with Marine, because she really was one of the first big, I don't know how to put this, but a leading thought leader who I'd heard speak about passive house and green building in general, and kind of the health benefits. And I think specifically she was talking about how well students performed in high performance schools compared to code built. And that really led me down a rabbit hole that got me just way, way, way more interested in passive house construction. So it was very, very cool to finally actually get the opportunity to really speak with her and to get to know her a little better.
Awesome. All right. Hey, well, let's get into it. This is your conversation with Marine Sanchez.
I'm here with Marine Sanchez of RDH, and I'd like to know, Marine, your academic background and your position at RDH.
Yes, so I'm with RDH Building Science. I'm a passive house specialist, and I lead the passive house services for RDH company-wide. So that allows me to see what's happening on both sides of the border in the US and Canada. That makes it quite interesting. I am a passive house accredited certifier as well. So I get to also play both roles between designing and certifying, which makes it quite interesting. And the background is slightly more uncommon, I guess. I'm originally French. I studied there. I did my first master's, which was a lot more generalist back in France. And then I moved to the UK to do a second master's in sustainable buildings. Practiced there for about 10 years and then decided to bring my energy and do the next chapter in Canada. And I've been here for 5.5, almost 6 years by now. So feels like nothing, but feels like a lot too. So it's been a journey.
Yeah, I can imagine. And where in Canada are you based?
So I'm based in Toronto, but because of my role, I do get to pop in and out of all our US and Canadian offices, which is, again, pretty exciting to see how each region grows our passive house services differently and just the different needs that they have and the different approaches to doing so.
Right. So because you get to see so many different markets, what is the most exciting jurisdiction in your mind right now for passive house?
That is a loaded question based on the audience that you have. No, but I have to say, so I moved here almost 6 years ago, and Vancouver and BC were definitely really exciting. Mm-hmm. And you could see that from the rest of where the world was and how passive house was getting integrated in different portions of the world. Vancouver and BC were definitely having a speed that we hadn't seen quite as much before, maybe except in Brussels or very particular municipality that went all in. However, I will say that as much as this was extremely impressive, Massachusetts has now topped it completely up with their new stretch code, because I believe they probably have the fastest pace of implementation in terms of steps becoming more and more stringent and where they're getting the industry and in what amount of time. Other jurisdictions like, again, Vancouver, BC, Toronto as well, New York. What I really like about the regulations or requirements that they've put out are the fact that they're being extremely clear as to where we are and where we want to be and what is the time frame and how do we move the entire wave of the industry, right? From where we are to where we want to be. People can go faster if they want to, but if not, the path is extremely clear. So they've all done that really, really well, but Massachusetts is now doing so in a really reduced amount of time, which definitely makes Massachusetts the most exciting right now because it's such a big jump, but such an interesting jump, which could show, that we are capable of delivering high performance as the norm. Of course, it takes efforts from every single parties, right? Like municipalities, designers, contractors, clients, developers, but I do believe it's feasible. So I've been kept busy by this market a lot more than the other markets at the moment.
I'm a little jealous because I was in New York for a long time, and New York I felt like kind of a leader on the East Coast of at least the US. And
yes,
now I feel like we're being jumped by Massachusetts.
Which is good competition, isn't it?
It is.
Because at the end of the day, everybody wins, right?
Yeah. And if they're going to push New York to try to come back and outdo Massachusetts, that's just going to make everything better for us all.
Exactly. So I think there's a little bit of the same game between Vancouver and Toronto as well, which, is as far as I'm concerned, it's good. Like you poke them here and there and everybody gets to work trying to do better, which is good.
What's the environment like in Toronto? I think when I came on the accelerator, one of the first big projects I saw was this big student housing at University of Toronto Scarborough that I know you're heavily involved in. But what are some of the other big projects going around Toronto? How do you feel like the regulatory environment is there?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Definitely the University of Toronto Scarborough Passive House residence, now known as Harmony Commons, by the way.
Oh.
The opening ceremony was just, I think, 10 days ago. So it's kind of exciting. I'm still, on a little cloud from the opening ceremony and seeing that project complete. This is definitely a big milestone for Ontario. There are a few other multi-residential projects that we've seen again in Toronto and a bit wider. Hamilton is definitely a hotspot. Windsor, Dundas, we've seen a few things. However, I think that the time frame, which is still, already quite stringent because more or less passive house equivalent levels to passive house will be mandatory through the Toronto Green Standard in 2025 for public buildings and 2028 for private buildings, because the public buildings are leading by example and they're always one step ahead of the rest of the industry. This will come soon enough, but because this is not yet minimum code requirement, I think that we're seeing a typology that works really, really well with passive house developed everywhere. So that I would say mid-rise residential typology, and this is becoming really common. So this is incredibly good because these are energy efficient buildings, but it's also helping with the housing crisis that we have. So really happy to see that. But I'm seeing the momentum not being quite as fast, I would say, on other typologies. So I certainly hope that the closer we get to the date, the more momentum we're going to see, the same as, what Massachusetts is seeing right now, because it has made its path onto the code, more or less.
Okay.
But it is there. I think we're going to start seeing the momentum probably pick up again a little bit more.
Okay. I'll jump back a little bit into just kind of some personal history. When you were, initially growing up, what kind of attracted you to architecture and design and engineering and eventually high performance building?
I didn't know what I wanted to do, to tell you the truth. As a very starting point, I just didn't know. I've always liked solving problems. And so I think that's where my engineering mind came from. So went into a generalist engineering school where I did a bit of everything, it's machine work, coding, fluid dynamics, civil, structural, all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. And then I did some electives, and that is where I finally got to connect with the architectural world as well as climate change, right? Which was already quite present, but we were allowed to dive a lot deeper than what would be the standard curriculum that we'd had during the year. And it's actually through that triangle between architecture, climate change, and engineering that I actually looked and I was like, these are the three pillars that I have to work with. I don't believe I want to retrain in front of 10 years to become an architect, and I'm not sure, this is exactly my passion, but I need to work with buildings. I need to have an impact on the climate crisis we're facing. And I do want to use the skills because I really enjoy the collaboration and the problem solving. And so more or less being in that triangle and searching frantically about what I should do. This is how I discovered that second master's that I did in sustainable buildings, which was, I think, really early days, because I'm sure the curriculum has evolved both, in North America and in Europe as to what this entails, but really starting to touch on energy modeling, high performance design principles, all of that, which more or less gave me a really good ground to start, because I was like, this is what I want to do. Okay. But then I did not get into passive house straight away because that was not part of my education. when I graduated and went from being at university to being in the working world, I wasn't quite aware that we had such a big performance gap with buildings. And so that performance gap, which is, what we call the gap that we have between predicted energy consumption and actual energy consumptions of buildings. And so when I started working, everything was supposed to be perfect in the educational world, and everything was far from perfect at work. And I got pretty mad because I was like, this is, building physics. Like, it hasn't changed for a long time. It's not that hard. We should have probably figured that out by this time. And so I remember reading a lot about that performance gap. I was really lucky because Bill Bordas and Adrian Lehman from the UK had done a lot of work on post-occupancy evaluation. I got to read and work with them quite a bit. And that's more or less my first introduction to the Passive House standard, which was my way of bridging that performance gap that made me pretty unhappy when I first discovered it after all these years of studies where everything was working perfectly on a blank page of paper.
So when you first kind of entered into not just high performance building, but the actual Passive House community, I mean, were there any kind of mentors or anybody who really kind of showed you the ropes?
I was working with a very small firm at the time. So again, like the possibility of mentorship internally was probably more limited, but we're extremely lucky in the Passive House community in the sense that the knowledge sharing and the welcoming of anybody joining our community, the inclusivity, I think is pretty different and pretty impressive compared to other portions of the construction industry, I would say. And it has been my experience as well on this. So when I first entered the community, and that was back in the UK. So the UK Passive House community has, helped raise me in that way. I did have really good mentors in different companies that would always be available when you pick up the phone and say, okay, I think I've done all my research. I've looked at this, I've looked at that, and I'm not 100% sure. Can I, ask you a few questions and use you as a sounding board and all of that? So it's been great to have these people around. And I've been trying ever since. I think I've been teaching since like 2013 into the in the Passive House community, and I've always tried to give it back as well, right? Like to share with people where is the community at and who you can talk to so that people don't try to reinvent the wheel, right? Like we connect together, we share the lessons learned. It doesn't mean we've learned everything. It doesn't mean we know it all, but empowering others to start with the end point of where you're at and letting them go with that and tell them, go tell me what doesn't work and come back to the community with more lessons learned so that we can all move, further and faster together.
So when did you work on your first actual Passive House project? I can assume this is maybe a while ago, so some of those solutions hadn't been discovered yet.
So you're right, and you're going to laugh about this because my first project, so I joined the firm I was in the UK, and I got the opportunity to work on the first Passive House retrofits that were done in the UK. So that was 2011, which is a while back. And honestly, starting with Passive House retrofits, it's already a hard thing to do. And doing retrofits when the NFIT standard was not yet created, therefore you're aiming for Passive House Classic on heritage buildings that have to maintain their external appearance, I feel like I didn't start with the easiest project.
No, I would say not. I mean, could you even get historic windows at that point in time?
Interestingly enough, we had to make our own.
Oh.
Right. So all of these first few projects that were literally like smaller scale residential heritage buildings, right, in conservation areas in and around London, we had to make glazed sash lookalike windows. So, the sash where you have like a bottom and a top part, and the bottom part is the one sliding. Like this is something very common that we have back in the UK. And so we had to do a fixed top window and a tilt and turn lower window, but they had to look like Visage. And so we literally worked with a carpenter to create this, and then we had to install them in different locations, and then we would talk to conservation officers, and we would do a blind test with them, which, like you just grab them, put them on the streets and ask them, so are any of these windows different? So that you no, that's fine, they look good. Okay, good, because one of them is really different from the others. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was, again, extremely interesting to see what we can do, to see where we could go, especially with smaller teams on smaller projects. So maybe you have a bit less inertia, things move a little bit faster, and also seeing the difference that it makes the difference that it makes to the occupants, right? You're talking about a very, not cold, but like wet and rainy climate where typical houses are just a pile of bricks that are not really well insulated.
Yeah.
Like a third of the kids have asthma there, and this mold and this and this and that. And you're like, I'm pretty sure it doesn't have to be this way. And so getting some of these first projects out and then hearing it straight from the owner's mouth as to like the amount of difference it has made to their families, that has been incredible. And I think that all these projects that we did really early on, I'm just thinking about this because we're just around the time where we're doing the International Passive House Open Days. And these houses kept being used year after year after year for all the Passive House Open Days. And no matter how good your energy consultant would be, me and others, as to selling the benefits of Passive House, nothing would make a better job but to get these potential clients into a passive house. And they were halfway through the doorway. They hadn't seen the house at all, and within 3 seconds, they're like, yes, we want one of those. And I'm like, but you haven't seen anything. And I've been explaining all of this to you before. And it's the feeling, the comfort, the difference on all levels have been extremely interesting, and the source of getting more passive house out there, especially in London. And so I think that was probably the most rewarding part as well, right? To see the impact, and then to have other people to say, I want what they have. Like, I get it now, and this is where we should be going.
I guess jumping from your first Passive House project, I'd like to know, what is your favorite Passive House project that you've gotten a chance to work on, and why? And if you have a couple, that's fine. Or if it's like choosing children.
It feels a little bit like choosing children. I'll be honest with you, but I'll try to give you a few examples, I guess. The one I had in mind to start with was a project called Agar Grove. So that was the first large multi-residential certified project in London at the time, where they are working on a whole neighborhood to be developed to passive house. And I was part of the first phase, which completed in 2018. Mm-hmm. And first of all, it was like kind of the first passive house project at a much larger scale than we had done before in the UK. And also the size meant that it was the first time working with a much bigger team, a general contractor that wasn't familiar with passive house. Mm-hmm. And why I would say it was one of my favorites was because of a role that I had. So that with energy consultants and passive house designers, a lot of your work is required during the design stages, right? Yeah. There's a lot of energy modeling, there's a lot of coordination and collaboration with the rest of the design team. You need to do that no matter what. So I agree, this is fairly standard. However, you don't always get to spend as much time on site to ensure that your design is actually going to be implemented. And as much as this is embedded into the QA/QC process that Passive House is, this project was the first time that I was hired by the general contractor to be their Passive House site support. Okay. Right? Because they had never done this before. So rather than training one of their own, they're like, look, it's a bit complicated. It's a bit new. How about you come with us for the first portion? And I literally spent about a couple of years in a trailer, once or twice a week. And I found that extremely, it was different from a desk-based job where you're collaborating with architects and structural and mechanical engineers. But I found it extremely rewarding because it really asked me to put myself into somebody else's shoes and to deliver that education so that the GC and the trades could have the same vocabulary that the design team was using. So when they were asking for A, B, and C, they would translate it and say, oh, this all looks new, but based on what was learned, when they ask for A, they actually mean, like translating more or less from the energy model and performance requirements to what matters on site. This is what you do normally, and you can keep doing, business as usual. But this question is where we're doing things differently because it impacts the model. And this is where we're going to get extra scrutiny. And that's what they're asking for. And so that kind of like translator job and seeing a different perspective and also getting the buy-in from a whole team on site that had never done Passive House, to me was also a very different experience. I started from the technical background, but I don't think that the technical background is enough. It's you need it as a robust base.
Yes.
But it's probably not enough to, lead an industry transformation and to make all kinds of teams that have never design and construction teams that have never delivered Passive House to do it well and smoothly for the first go at it.
Yeah.
And so doing that, building the trust with the site team, which was very different. It, again, especially as a younger woman on a construction site with a discipline that is not yet really established because nobody, questions if you need a structural engineer, but, are you really sure you need the energy consultant? So all of that was pretty interesting. And incredibly rewarding when we made it.
And it seems like there's a real value for you to actually be on site. I feel like most energy consultants I've met have stayed, in the office for the most part.
The end part to that is that the more you see on site, the better an energy modeler you become.
Very excellent point.
Right? Because you're not just working with assumptions, you can translate what is happening on site, making your assumptions, I think, a lot more robust as well. So that's why, at RDH, we're always pretty strong in sending a lot of our modelers on site as well, because the energy consultant has, how to say that, we've been described as the glue before, but I think it needs a bit more description. But it's like you are the messenger of how your design and construction teams are using the energy budgets that they're entitled for each project, right? The same way that the cost consultant is your messenger as to how the team is using their financial budget. And for you to be a good messenger, you do have to understand really a little bit of everything. And for sure, that starts from behind a desk, digging into every single discipline's like drawings and specification, but it does get better by also going to site and seeing what is actually the end product so that you're, and creating that feedback loop so that for the next project, your assumptions are, right, even more on point and more accurate or more realistic or something like that. So it's kind of, I don't know, it never stops, right? Never stop learning.
And that was the first part. We're going to cut it there and pick it up next week. But that's our first, your first chat on the pod, Jay, with Marine Sanchez from RDH. You mentioned it was a bit of a fanboy experience for you. But in terms of takeaways and Marine's story, was there anything that sort of jumped out at you? What was your highlight?
I think my highlight has been the excitement around Massachusetts that everybody in North America is kind of feeling, which I don't think I totally appreciated how much of just a beacon they've really become, and just how just the major positive changes with their changes to their code. So that was really cool hearing from Marine all about that.
Yeah, and I feel like that's just starting. There was a lot of talk about Massachusetts in Houston this year at FierceCon, and it was more around the buzz of kind of what's about to happen is how I felt, because there's a lot of things that are on their way fairly quickly. A lot of work's gone into getting to that point, but I think things are really going to take off there.
Yeah, and it's an earlier interview I did this year that will be an article coming out fairly soon with Mike of Rhodey Architecture, or Architect, I forget which one. But he certified the first 3 single-family houses in Boston that got PHI's certification, and that happened just this summer. So, it is happening very quickly there, and it's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Zach, what was some highlights there for you?
Well, one was that her choice of her favorite project was the project where she had the chance to spend all that time on site and connect with the trades and kind of be sharing passive house principles and vocabulary and all that on site. And then I also was really, and this is sort of like a geeky, like passive house windows thing, but I was really interested to hear about the making of their own windows on the retrofit work. And it sounded to me like these were, that the historic windows were classic sort of double hung windows, and that they were then rebuilding windows that had a fixed upper pane and then had a tilt turn for the lower pane, which is what Zola Windows created for its simulated double hung product. I think with Sam McAfee, and then I know there are lots of other window manufacturers who do that too. So it was like the kind of the proto simulated double hung window. It sounded like they were creating there. So it was cool to hear that history. I wasn't aware that it predated the innovation that happened here in North America. So that was cool.
Yeah, I can just picture taking someone along and doing that. I like the idea of a blind test and having a someone from the council saying, "Can you see anything different?" And no. Good. Yeah. And if it's not obvious, and if nothing looks different, I mean, that is one of the big challenges with the heritage buildings is making it look original, but being far from original in terms of performance. Something that's, I just loved hearing the background stories, and as we hear so many times with people's journey experiences just like that with the window, but some of those early days of just how challenging things were and how passionate people would have had to be and dedicated to really push through so many barriers to get some of the first passive house projects done. And we really have them to thank for things that we can kind of take for granted, of what products are available, what services are available, just the awareness of skills and techniques now. Whereas in those early days, people really were, going out on a limb and having to work quite hard. And as you said right at the outset, Jay, Marine is definitely one of those early leaders. She mentioned something about getting people into experience the feeling and comfort of a home, and particularly I think it was describing more social and affordable housing, and as soon as people walk in the door, they feel the difference. And I think that is really compelling. We hear that quite a lot anecdotally, but it's as a bunch of engineers and architects, it's really important to just be reminded of that power of the experience of going into a passive house. And we can throw as much data and performance statistics as we like, and some of that will stick, but is nothing like you going and feeling what it's like inside a building that is warm, dry, and healthy and quiet, and all those things that make a really nice place to be. And that's why, having more examples of these buildings and getting people the chance to actually go in and experience them firsthand is so much more powerful than trying to communicate with graphs and stats, and even with such great writers as yourself, Jay.
Well, thank you very much. But it brings to mind. I did an article about cidery in Callicoon, New York. This was designed by River Architects. And I worked in a kitchen a long, long time ago at an Irish pub, and it was hot and loud and terrible. And I it was not a pleasant experience. And they had converted the kitchen in this cidery, it's a really high-end, great kitchen, to induction heating, and it's within the passive envelope. And it was 70 degrees. It was quiet. It was pleasant to be in. It smelled delicious. That to me, I still think was kind of this like earth-shattering moment about how huge of a difference Passive House really is. And that's one thing I'll always, that will always stick with me.
Very cool. Well, this is the first part. Was there anything else that either of you guys wanted to call out from that first half of the interview?
I don't think so, except that Marine is awesome. So it's always fun to hear her tell her story. Yes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I love the something she also talked about was the combination of architecture, engineering, and the desire to do climate change has really brought her to where she is, and possibly ahead of her time back when she was figuring that out, and definitely being a great champion of the cause in the meantime. So there's more to come, more great stuff from Marine. So I look forward to that next week. Zach, remind us about Reimagine.
Oh, yes. Well, actually, before I do, I want to also plug something that's happening this week, December 14th, Thursday, at noon Eastern. We have a special Passive House Component Spotlight that we're presenting with Hugh Wariski of Partel, and it'll be about superior weather tightness and protection for modern methods of construction. So we want to encourage people to come to that component spotlight on this Thursday, if you're listening to the podcast on the first week of its publication. So now on to Reimagine Buildings, which is the big event that we're focused on. It's on March 7th and 8th. Very exciting 24-hour around the world event. And we're going to play a reel for you about it right now. Imagine you could learn about 24 of the best buildings solving for climate change, instantly become part of a global movement, and gain the knowledge you need to create real change in what you do every day. Join us for a one-of-a-kind, 24-hour, around-the-world, global online happening, Reimagine Buildings 24. We'll circumnavigate the globe, unveiling a new, innovative building project every hour, complete with actionable solution sets, expert insights, and key lessons learned. We'll connect you with peers from around the world and from your region, so you can build the network you need to create buildings that make a difference. We all know that time is of the essence, that climate change is already here, and that today, too many of our buildings are not only making the problem worse, but also leave us vulnerable to climate extremes that are already here. But that's all changing. A global movement is turning it around, reimagining buildings as resilient and healthy havens, as climate solutions. Tradespeople, builders, architects, engineers, developers, policymakers, and just regular people making it happen on the ground on every continent of our beautiful planet. Join that movement at Reimagine Buildings 24. So again, that's on March 7th and March 8th. We couldn't be more excited. The program is coming together, and a really exciting list of presenters that we'll be unveiling very soon. We're working with dozens of community partners around the world, including Passive House Institute New Zealand, also FIAS, the Passive House Institute's International Passive House Association, AIA, or the American Institute of Architects, New York State, NESI, all sorts of really great groups, and many of those organizations will be presenting live events that are adjacent to this virtual online event as well. So we'll roll out information about that. But it's so fun to be putting this together and to be, creating a platform and a moment where the world's practitioners of zero carbon building can come together and celebrate and learn from one another. So I hope everyone joins us. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I hope everyone joins us, and I hope people start to share and get others excited. So a big part of Reimagine is getting that wider audience. So if you're listening to this, you probably have heard about Reimagine already. You might have seen the trailer. I've watched it a few times, and I still find it amazing. Beautiful images and also some scary images. But please do share that. And the point of not just Reimagine, the platform on YouTube, but also this particular event is really to get out beyond just our regular Passive House audience. So get others excited about it as well. Let them know that it's happening. And, we're hoping to get a really, really massive global audience for that event on March 7th and 8th, 2024. All right. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Jay. And we'll be back again next week with the second half of your conversation with Marine Sanchez. We'll see you then.